She walked into my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot I had just made, and told me I needed to start knocking before entering common areas of the house. My house. The house I bought in 1987. The house where I painted my son's bedroom ceiling with little glow-in-the-dark stars because he was afraid of the dark. I didn't say anything. I poured my own cup and went to sit on the back porch. And that was the first time. I told myself it was just nerves. She was still adjusting. They had only moved in 3 months prior, after my son lost his job at the logistics company, and they couldn't cover rent on her income alone. I told them to take as long as they needed. That's what fathers do. Her name was Tanya. She was 31 years old, had sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, and from the very first week she moved in, she had a way of making me feel like a guest in my own home. Not loudly, not in ways you could easily describe to someone else. It was in the small things, the way she'd rearrange items in the refrigerator and sigh loudly when she had to move something of mine. The way she'd change the thermostat the moment I left the room. The way she'd speak to my son in a low voice whenever I was nearby, and they both go quiet when I walked in. My son's name is Clifton. He was 43 at the time, a good man at his core. I have to believe that, but somewhere along the way he had learned to make himself small around her. He'd look at his phone when she spoke over me at dinner. He'd nod along. He didn't push back. I watched it happen slowly, the way you watch a season change. Gradual, then suddenly all at once, and you're standing there wondering how the leaves got on the ground. I'm 68 years old. I retired from 26 years with the County Public Works Department in 2019. My wife, Connie, passed 2 years after that. Pancreatic cancer, 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. After she was gone, the house felt too big. I thought having Clifton home would help. I thought it would feel like family again. It didn't feel like family. The morning everything shifted, I was in the living room. It was a Saturday in October, and I had the news on, just background noise, really something to fill the silence. I was drinking my second cup of coffee and reading the paper, the actual paper, because that's a habit I'd had since I was 22, and I don't intend to stop. She came downstairs in a robe, looked at the TV, then looked at me. "I need the living room," she said. I looked up. "I'll be out of your way in a little bit. I need it now. I have a call." I gestured toward the dining room. "You're welcome to use the table in there. I can keep the volume low." "No." She picked up the remote from the arm of my chair. She just reached over and took it, and turned off the television. "I need this space. You have your room upstairs." I sat very still for a moment. I could feel my heart rate go up. That slow flush of something that wasn't quite anger yet, more like disbelief. The paper was still in my hands. I hadn't moved. "This is my home," I said. I kept my voice level. "I'm proud of that." She looked at me the way you look at something that is mildly inconvenient. A cart blocking an aisle. A slow driver. "And Clifton and I live here too," she said. "It can't always be about what you want." Then she sat down on the couch, opened her laptop, and put in her earbuds. I stood up. I folded my paper. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall for a long time. Clifton was still asleep. He slept late on weekends. I thought about waking him. I thought about a lot of things. What I kept coming back to was a question I hadn't asked myself in years. What am I actually going to do here? Because here's what I understood. Sitting on that bed, getting angry wouldn't fix anything. Confronting her wouldn't fix anything. She'd make it about personalities, about me being difficult, and Clifton would be caught in the middle and he'd look at his phone and nod along. I'd already seen that movie. I knew how it ended. So I decided not to say anything. I decided to pay attention instead. It started small. I began noticing things I had dismissed before as quirks or misunderstandings. She was on the phone a lot. Not unusual in itself, but the calls happened at odd hours. Late at night after Clifton was asleep, early in the morning before anyone else was up, and she'd take them in the garage or in the car with the windows up, which didn't make sense because we live in upstate New York and October in upstate New York is not garage with the windows up weather. I noticed that she received mail she never mentioned, not packages, envelopes, legal-sized, a few of them. She'd collect them before I could see the return addresses and bring them straight upstairs. I noticed that she asked Clifton twice in 1 week about refinancing. She was casual about it, framed it as something she'd read about online, interest rates and equity. Clifton wasn't interested. He said the timing wasn't right. She let it go both times, but I saw something pass across her face when he said no. Not disappointment. Calculation. I started keeping a small notebook. Nothing dramatic, just dates, times, observations. The kind of habit I picked up from 30 years of field reports. You don't document because you know what something means. You document because you might need to know later. The mail was what broke it open. One afternoon in early November, I was in the kitchen when the mail came through the slot. I usually let it sit until after lunch. That day, out of no particular reason I can name, I went to pick it up. There were 3 envelopes. 2 were mine. A utilities statement. A magazine. The third was addressed to her. The return address was from a law office in Raleigh, North Carolina. I set it on the counter. It wasn't my mail. I wasn't going to open it. But Raleigh. She'd told Clifton she was from a small town outside Charlotte. She'd said she had no family left to speak of. That she'd spent her 20s moving around before she settled in Albany, where she'd met my son at a work event 4 years ago. Raleigh was a 3-hour drive from Charlotte. Not impossible, but it was specific. A law office was specific. I wrote it down. That night I couldn't sleep. At 2 in the morning I was sitting in the kitchen with a glass of water and I thought about a man I used to work with named Garrett. He'd retired 2 years before me, and his nephew was a private investigator somewhere in the capital region. I'd never had reason to think about that in any serious way before. I thought about it now. I found Garrett's number in an old contact list on my phone. I texted him at 2 in the morning, which I know is not ideal, but I did it anyway. I said I was sorry for the hour and asked if his nephew was still working, and if he'd be willing to pass along my number. Garrett texted back at 2:15. He was apparently awake. He said yes and sent me a contact. His nephew's name was Brady. I called him the next morning while Tanya was out and Clifton was at a doctor's appointment. I told Brady I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I told him I had a daughter-in-law living in my home and some things weren't adding up and I wanted to understand what I was dealing with before I said anything to anyone. I told him I wanted to be sure I wasn't wrong. He asked me what I had. I told him about the calls, the envelopes, the Raleigh return address, the questions about refinancing. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Give me a week." It took 9 days. He called me on the Thursday morning. I was on the back porch, the one place in the house where I could take a call without risk of being overheard. It was cold. I didn't notice. "I need to walk you through this carefully," he said, "because it's a lot." Brady had found a marriage record. Not the one she had with Clifton, another one. Filed in Wake County, North Carolina in 2019. The marriage was to a man named Douglas Hale, a contractor from Ghana, and as of the date Brady had done his search, there was no divorce filing, no annulment, nothing. I sat with that for a moment. I made him say it again. Tanya had married Clifton in August of 2021. If the North Carolina marriage was still legally intact, and Brady said it appeared to be, then her marriage to my son wasn't legal. She was already someone's wife when she stood in front of a judge in Albany County and said she wasn't. "Is the husband aware?" I asked. "That's the interesting part," Brady said. "I made a call, spoke with him briefly. Didn't tell him everything, didn't tell him your name. He said she left without explanation in early 2021. He's been trying to locate her. He had no idea she'd remarried. He said he never received any divorce papers. I thanked Brady, asked him to send me everything in writing, and sat on my porch for a very long time, watching the bare trees in my backyard. My mind went to Clifton. This was going to break him. He'd loved her. I knew that, whatever else, that part was real. He'd loved her the way men love when they've waited a long time and finally believe they've found the right one. And that made me furious in a way the rest of it didn't quite reach. Not at him, at her. I called Brady back and asked him one more thing. I asked him whether, during his search, he had found any financial irregularities. He paused. Then he said, "That's a separate conversation. But yes, there are some things you should know." Over the next 2 days, I learned the following: that Tanya had applied from inside my home using our household Wi-Fi to one of those online mortgage services, the kind that do cash-out refinancing with minimal verification. Listing herself as a co-owner of my property, she had not completed the application. Something had stalled it. But the inquiry had been made, and Brady had found it through a soft credit pull connected to the property address. My property address. My house. She hadn't succeeded, but she had tried. I spent one evening on the phone with an attorney, a real estate and family law attorney in Troy that a colleague from the county had recommended years ago, and whose card I'd kept in my desk drawer for no reason I could remember. I told her everything. She told me what my options were. She said the bigamy issue was a matter for law enforcement, but that I should document everything and be very careful about the order of operations, meaning I should not tip off Tanya before I had spoken to Clifton. She also told me something I hadn't considered, that because Tanya's marriage to Clifton was potentially void from the beginning, Clifton had no legal obligation that a divorcing spouse would normally carry. There would be no division of my assets through him. My house was safe. I thanked her, paid her for the hour, and hung up. Then I called Clifton. I asked him to meet me for breakfast the next morning, not at the house, a diner on Route 9 called Morelli's, where we used to go on Saturday mornings when he was in high school. He said sure, and I could hear in his voice that he thought it was just a regular breakfast invitation. I let him think that. He was already there when I arrived, with a cup of coffee and the small smile he has when he's in a decent mood. He looked like my son. For a moment I just looked at him and thought about how badly I wished I was going to tell him something else. I put Brady's folder on the table. I didn't make a speech about it. I just told him what was in it, section by section, the way you remove a splinter, carefully, without stopping. The marriage record. Douglas Hale. The inquiry on the property. The timeline. I showed him the documents Brady had compiled. I showed him the attorney's notes about what it meant legally. He didn't speak for a long time. He turned pages. He stopped at the copy of the marriage certificate from Wake County and looked at it for what felt like 2 minutes without moving. "She told me she'd never been married before," he said finally. "I know," she said. He stopped. He put the papers down. He looked out the window at the parking lot. "I know," I said again. He asked me how long I'd known. I told him the truth, that I had suspicions for a couple of months and that I waited until I was certain because I didn't want to be wrong about this. He nodded slowly. He didn't blame me for the wait. I had been afraid he might. We sat there for a long time. I let him drive. This was his life and his grief, and I had my role, and my role right now was to be still and present, not to tell him what to do next. He decided what to do next himself. He called the non-emergency line for the Albany County Sheriff's Office from the parking lot of Morelli's while I waited in my truck. He spoke to someone for about 20 minutes. I watched him through the windshield, the way he stood, the straightness in his back. I hadn't seen him stand that way in a while. When he came back, he said they had referred him to someone in the district attorney's office who handled fraud cases. He had an appointment for the following Monday. He asked if he could come home with me. I said yes. We drove back together. Tanya's car was in the driveway. We went in through the kitchen. She was at the table with her laptop, and she looked up and immediately read the room the way people do when they've been waiting their whole life for a room to read wrong. "What's going on?" she asked. Clifton set the folder on the table in front of her. He didn't need to say much. Just a few sentences. I stood in the doorway and said nothing. This was his moment to have, not mine. She looked at the papers. She looked at Clifton. She looked at me once briefly, and I don't know exactly what she was looking for in my face. Whatever it was, she didn't find it. 2 days later, a woman from the district attorney's office came to the house. She was professional and quiet, and she explained to Tanya that she had some questions and that she had the right to have an attorney present. Tanya sat very straight. She said she understood. They spoke for a long time in the kitchen while Clifton and I sat in the living room and watched a football game with the sound too low to really follow. Neither of us said much. At one point he leaned back in the recliners, Connie's old recliner, the good one, and said, "I should have listened to you earlier." I told him I hadn't said anything for him to listen to. Not out loud. He smiled a little at that. The legal process took months, and I won't pretend to explain all of it, because I'm not a lawyer and the details got complicated in ways I couldn't always follow. What I can tell you is that the marriage between Clifton and Tanya was ultimately declared void. The DA's office pursued a bigamy charge. The mortgage inquiry Brady had found was referred to a separate investigation. Douglas Hale, the man in North Carolina, was contacted officially and was, from what I gathered through the process, both stunned and relieved. Tanya moved out in December. She went to stay with someone. I don't know who, and I didn't ask. She had an attorney. The process is ongoing, as these things tend to be. Clifton stayed. He didn't go back to sleeping late on weekends. Some mornings I come downstairs and he's already got the coffee made, and we sit out on the back porch with our cups and don't say very much, just the two of us in the cold morning air watching the light come up over the yard. That's enough. That's more than enough. I think about what that October morning cost me, the one where she took the remote and told me to go to my room. I think about sitting on the edge of my bed and asking myself what I was going to do. I think about the answer I came up with. Pay attention. Document. Be certain before you speak. I was 68 years old and I had 30 years of field reports in my blood and a notebook on my nightstand, and more patience than she ever gave me credit for. She made one miscalculation, and it was a significant one. She assumed because I stayed quiet I wasn't watching. I've thought a lot about that Tuesday morning. The coffee. The robe. The way she said common areas like she'd been rehearsing the phrase. What strikes me now isn't the anger I felt. It's how quickly I let it pass through me without acting on it. I went out to the porch. I sat with it. And somewhere in that stillness, something in me decided that the most powerful thing I could do was nothing. Not nothing forever. Nothing for now. There's a difference, and knowing that difference is something I couldn't have explained to a younger version of myself. It took 68 years and a lot of mornings sitting quietly to understand that patience isn't weakness. It's a kind of discipline, the hardest kind maybe because nobody sees you practicing it. Tanya made a mistake that a lot of people make when they think they're dealing with someone who won't push back. She looked at my age and my quiet, and she decided I wasn't a threat. She stopped being careful, and when people stop being careful, they reveal things. The late-night calls in the cold garage, the envelopes she collected before I could see them, the mortgage inquiry she thought left no trace. Every single one of those things happened because she believed I wasn't watching. I was always watching. That's what 30 years of field reports will do to a man. You develop a habit of documentation not because you're suspicious by nature, but because you understand that facts matter and memory alone isn't enough. I didn't write things down because I was planning something. I wrote things down because I had learned long ago that the truth doesn't announce itself. You have to be the kind of person who notices it, collects it, and holds it until the right moment. Clifton asked me once, over coffee on the back porch, whether I'd felt guilty keeping it from him as long as I did. I told him no. Not because I didn't care about his feelings. I thought about them every single day. But because going to him with suspicions would have accomplished nothing. She would have denied it. He might have believed her. And then I would have lost both of them. Bringing him the truth meant waiting until I had the whole truth, not just a part of it. That required a kind of honesty with myself about what I actually knew versus what I only felt. Knowing the difference between those two things is not easy. It's a form of integrity that doesn't get talked about much. The integrity to be fair even to the person who was wronging you. What Tanya lacked, when I think about her honestly, wasn't intelligence. She was smart. She'd been running the same scheme in one form or another long enough to know how to avoid attention. What she lacked was any real understanding of other people. She saw my silence and concluded I was passive. She saw my age and concluded I was done. She didn't account for the possibility that I was still fully present, still capable, still the man who bought that house in 1987 and raised a son under its roof and outlasted things harder than her. The outcome was the direct result of choices, hers and mine. She chose to lie, to deceive, to manipulate a man who trusted her. She chose to look at something that wasn't hers and decide she deserved it. Those choices didn't go unpunished, because the universe is fair in some cosmic sense. They went unpunished because I refused to look away, and because Clifton, when the moment came, found the strength to stand up straight and do the right thing. I think about Connie sometimes in moments like this. She was a quiet woman too, but she had a spine of iron when it mattered. She would have spotted Tanya in the first week. She would have been less patient than me about it, but she would have been proud of how it ended. Not because the right person got caught, but because her son stood in a parking lot and made the call himself. That's the part that matters most to me when I think about it now. The house is still standing. The coffee is still hot in the mornings. And when I come downstairs and Clifton already has the pot going, I don't need to say anything at all.